so I've talked to creators, especially from marginalized communities, who are quite fearful about something like, tagging their video LGBTQ or Black Lives Matter, whatever it may be, because they want their content to resonate with their audience and be seen by the audience, but you don't know where your content is going to end up.
Hey, Brooke, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here today.
Absolutely. Today, I'm very curious to talk about certain topics that are there, right? But too many times, I think that we don't discuss about them, right? So I'm very curious to see your point of view, your research, your analysis, behind that. And before we get into that, I would love to hear, a bit more about yourself. And we use this thing called a map with our guests. Basically, it's divided in three main sections to know a bit more about your career, your personal life is basically divided in the mission. So basically, it is what do you aim to achieve with your work, achievements. So any notable milestone could be in your career, your life, or both if you want. And the last one is the purpose. So why do you do what you do?
I am Brooke Duffy, and I am an associate professor in the Department of Communication at Cornell University. So in terms of the mission, what do I aim to achieve? I mean, I'm an academic, and so I think a lot about the creation of knowledge. But what does that mean? Well, I'm interested in producing knowledge on the role of social media in work, employment, and society, with particular attention to labor. And of course, that brings me to the creator economy. Another part of my mission as an academic is educating students. And so undergraduates, of course, many in the communication world interested in working in comm, in tech, in marketing, in media, in the social media economy. But I also train graduate students who are very much interested in thinking about what social media means in the context of culture and society and economy and politics. It's always strange to talk about your achievements. And so there's the milestones that matter for tenure and promotion. So I've published 3 books, most significantly a book called Not Getting Paid to Do What You Love, which was drawing attention to the work and labor of what we now think of as creators, as they think about the difficulties as well as opportunities of career success. Currently working on a new book, which I think we'll get into on the creator economy. A huge milestone for me was getting my PhD. I'm a first-generation college student. I went to a state school, an excellent one, Penn State, but getting a PhD was never on my radar, and so I always like to talk to students about that. And finally, in terms of purpose, why I do what I do, I mean, part of it is I think there's such a lack of understanding about what it means to work in the social media economy. And part of it is just because it's changing all the time, but there's also a sense of dismissiveness or misunderstanding or even a lack of value ascribed to these careers. And so, one of my purposes is to draw attention to what it actually means to work in these fields. But I think, part of this is also because so much of our lives are reconfigured by social media and labor. And so how can we think and understand the relationship between these two when, whether you're a creator or an academic or working in the gig economy or working in any field, you're very much compelled to put yourself out there. And so thinking about what the benefits are, but also the risks.
And I think that what you do is very important because when I was myself in college, too many times I was studying things that have been very outdated. And I understand that many times you do have to study things that are like, theory or certain things, right? When it comes to marketing and business, right? But sometimes there is a lack, right? When it comes to studying things that are from the 80s and then understanding what is happening these days, right? And then I think it's very important. That's also why sometimes I do also myself lectures, right, for students where we go through, okay, this is what is happening these days. This is how you should approach it, right, from a professional standpoint, together with also analytics, right, and academic point of view. So very important is what you do. Very much needed these days, right? Because again, there is sometimes this gap, right, between what you see in the real world, right, and what happening sometimes in academia, and there has always been this sort of lack, right, of a few years, right, sometimes
Yeah.
to arrive there. So thank you for your work there, very very important. And let's get into that. So your graduate seminar is called, there is this structure, right, that I find also very interesting. That is called the platforms, power and precarity in the creator economy, right? So I would like to know a bit more about that. Is it something that you come out with that? Tell me a bit more. How did it started, and why do you think that was needed to discuss about this free piece?
Absolutely. And so I was very excited to develop and teach this course. And it started, I taught a version of it maybe 6 or 7 years ago, which was on media technology and society. And so when I went to revive the class last semester, realized, as you can imagine, that a lot of the not just the readings were out of date, but the topics, the approaches, the research. And so, thought about what is it that we're talking about when we are considering work as an influencer or creator economy, and how can we make a lot of the debates and topics connect with both my students, but really, the wider world of social media and tech. And so for me, a lot of the debates about what it means to be a creator today, what it means to produce content, what it means to be an entrepreneur, to have your career dependent on a particular platform is to think about the struggles of power. At what point do we have agency of our work compared to moments when we're beholden to platforms or we're tied to the expectations of audiences or advertisers. So there's the power platforms, of course. We're seeing this in the past 2 weeks as once again the TikTok ban seems to be looming. How do creators think about longevity and sustaining their business when the platform that they have built their audience could potentially vanish with little notice? And finally, precarity. And precarity is one of these academic terms that gets thrown around a lot, but we can think of it as the insecurity of a job. And so that means, coming back to the example of TikTok, maybe the platform that you have your audience on may not necessarily be there, or the content that you expect to do well is suddenly not garner an audience because of this unseen algorithm, or the brand deals aren't coming in because of some wider force. And so the allure of creator careers is the fact that you never know what the next day is going to be like, but that's also a form of risk. And so a final thing I'll say about the class is, as much novelty as there is ascribed to this, I think it's really important to draw continuities between what TikTokers and YouTubers and Instagram influencers do today compared to the precursors. And so thinking about working in Hollywood or traditional advertising or film or as a novelist, there's important continuities that I don't think get enough attention when we are considering the world of cultural work today.
And in addition to precarity, right, the risk, the especially when it comes to brand deals, right? One month you can do fantastic, another month you can go, like zero, right? And that's why also in other episodes we discussed about different revenue streams, maximizing your revenues, and minimizing the risk of putting all the eggs in one basket, right? There is absolutely something that I think it becomes more and more important instead of being only on one platform trying to, right? Or like owning your audience. In another episode, we talk about newsletters, having email address of the people so that you can actually reach all of them if needed, right? Especially with algorithm changing all the time. In addition to this, another topic that I think is quite interesting that you also cover is this thing called it the visibility bind, right? So basically, is this concept, right? That and I would like to know, like, with something that you come out also know with a term that would be also interesting to see. These things where we have this like double-edged sword of hypervisibility. Someone that with just a camera and an internet connection these days, you can get in front of millions of people, and we have pros and cons of that, right? Have you mapped the top pros and cons of these, again, hypervisibility that gives you, I guess, a lot of benefits, but at the same time, risk, problems, issues, burnout, and so on. So I'm curious to hear from you on that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm currently working on a book on the topic that, going back to your early point about the academic lag, I'm trying to finish this project and knowing that it'll be out a few years down the road. But essentially, the concept of the visibility bind draws attention to some of the precarity and risks that creators face, where, of course, their careers are contingent on reputation, attention, and these metrics of visibility, very indices of visibility. So in thinking about what it means to be visible today, to put yourself out there today, I found that creators experience these two quite contradictory experiences and anxieties. One, of course, is the fear of being invisible. So maybe the algorithm is going to throttle your content today, or you are going to wake up and have a ban or be blocked out of your account, or potentially be shadow banned. And there's a lot of fuzziness surrounding that. Or invisibility also means you're not getting compensated enough, right? Your brands are reaching out to you, but they're paying in this promise of exposure rather than any sort of compensation. And so this to me felt like the risks of invisibility for creators. But at the same time, there's the fears of being too visible. And so, you want to get your content out there, but what if it gets seen to, quote unquote, the wrong audience?
Yeah.
Or if you're dealing with hate and harassment, or a quite different kind of fear of commercial hypervisibility is appropriation, right? We're seeing a lot of these risks animated in by Gen AI, where how do you think about ownership and permissions and the fact that your content may be taken, exploited, utilized by someone else without your knowledge or consent. And so, I kind of started these projects separately. I was studying influencer hate and harassment at the same time that I was doing this project on algorithms, and I realized that this is all about visibility and this visibility trap that many creators find themselves in. And so much of the book talks about the trap, but also importantly the ways that the creators are contesting and resisting the visibility bind. And I think that's a really important part of it because creators know how to work social media. Their careers depend upon it. And so I think it is critical to consider the ways that they are pushing back against surveillance and platform powers and various inequities. But kind of what ties this together is this notion of the visibility bind.
Is your brand ready to amplify its reach? Well, the Influencer Marketing Factory is here for you. We are a global influencer marketing agency helping brands ignite their growth. From influencer identification to campaign strategy, handling legalities and agreements, to managing shipping and logistics, we got you all covered. We work with hundreds of brands across different verticals, from Fortune 500 companies to direct-to-consumer brands. And we don't just stop there. With detailed ROI analysis, we help brands like yours measure success, transforming impressions into conversions. You can find us at theinfluencermarketingfactory.com or just searching the Influencer Marketing Factory on Google.
And for instance, I find all the time, you already kind of mentioned it about getting in front of the wrong audience. Sometimes it happens to me to find the same video on TikTok and then Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, and you will see, I think it's very interesting as a study, when you take the same video from the same creator, posted on 3-4 different social media, and then in addition to that, saying if that video is seen by followers versus non-followers. And it's quite interesting to see the type of comments. Like I noticed that sometimes, make an example, maybe there is a creator that is well known by their audience for their hectic, way of doing things, or a very niche tone of voice or whatever, right? When it gets in front of their followers, these people know, right? Okay, is the style of this person. But then when it gets pushed on a social media to non-followers, then the type of comments, they don't get the reference, right? It's totally different. So have you ever, I'm curious, have you ever studied or done any analytics or research on something like that? Again, same content from the same creator to followers versus non-followers, and also how do they get on different social media? I'm curious to see if there is something that you ever explored.
That would be a fantastic study, and I want to see it done. No, I haven't, but I've heard many accounts from creators who talk exactly about that, where, and the euphemism, of course, is doing well. And so something they'll post on Instagram does well, resonates well with their audience, gets a lot of positive commentary. And then TikTok, the algorithm, the black boxed force, lands in, discoverability, ends up getting seen by a different audience that has very different views. And so that's where we get into discussions about rage baiting or engagement baiting. And so how do you create content for your audience when there's the reality that you don't necessarily know where the content is going to be seen? And so I've talked to creators, especially from marginalized communities, who are quite fearful about something like, tagging their video LGBTQ or Black Lives Matter, or whatever it may be, because they want their content to resonate with their audience and be seen by the audience. But you don't know where your content is going to end up. And so that's where, even going back to my earlier example of to what extent can we map social media creation onto earlier careers, it doesn't quite work the same way, right? Because if you're working in a traditional TV or magazine environment, production, distribution, exhibition, we have kind of a clear lineage where now, because of algorithms, because of practices of sharing and even hate sharing, because of the potential of audiences who can, in a lot of ways, weaponize content. There's so many ways where you can't really anticipate where your content is going to be seen and by whom.
And when you collect all this data, right? For instance, for this new book that is coming, is it a combination of one-on-one conversation with creators? Is it with that together with, let's say, quantitative surveys? Tell me a bit more about the methodology there to understand what is your typical day/week in order to collect all this data and then translate that into a book that can be understandable, from also people who are not necessarily in the industry.
Yeah, and your question about a typical day or typical week, I feel like that the response to that is very much like a creator. Like everything is different every day, and I the reality is I'm spending like most of my time managing email. But I tend to rely upon qualitative interviews, and so I've done about 100 interviews so far, mostly with creators, also with industry experts and platform representatives. And, I have hundreds and hundreds of pages of interview transcripts that I go through. What researchers call qualitatively code the data to pull out themes and make connections. I consume the content myself and think it's really important when you're talking about creators to draw attention to how much of their lives and careers are reflected through what they create. And I also as I keep mentioning my interest in looking about the precursors of this, like I find myself going back to early studies of the celebrity publicity machine or studies of like TV audiences to think about what's new here and what's not necessarily new here. And so I was looking at this TV sociology book from like the early 80s, and the author talks about how TV executives were really centered on like predicting the unpredictable. And it's just like what we were talking about, right? I mean, that's what creators do. You're trying to manage uncertainty and contain some of the risk when you really can't, because not only are we thinking about an oversaturated attention economy and these unseen algorithms, but so much of this content reflects what's going on in the world around us, and like those trends can't be anticipated. And so yeah, it's a lot of reading and trying to make sense of the data and having interview conversations, and of course just like sitting down and writing. And so for me, the best time to write is first thing in the morning. I feel like my brain starts to to wane after like 9 a.m. So I get up very early and get my writing done so I can have a little more space to continue to have the conversation.
And I'm pretty sure that during this conversation, one of the things that you also discuss with influencers and content creators is also all the monetary aspects of this, right? If we take influencer marketing of 10 years ago, it was this hobby thing where, maybe I'm gonna get a product for free. I'm gonna do $50, right? And everyone was happy at the time because it was so new, it was unregulated, it was the Wild West. But then in the years, right, we start kind of have a sense of how much to pay influencers based on deliverables, geolocation, industry, metrics, right, and so on. If you're represented, if you're independent and so on. So now we do have a better sense. I still believe that we're kind of far away from having rate cards that can work for everyone because it's so unique, right? The influencer marketing world. So with that said, again, I'm pretty sure that you discussed about that. And one of the things that more and more is coming up is about influencer, pay gap, right? So first of all, if it's something that you discussed with creators, I would like, to see if there's anything that they said is a challenge, is an issue. I would like to understand if this is actually something that is, if came up, and if so, why? Trying to understand a bit, the cause of that. And yeah, I would like just to understand a bit more. Again, it's such an important topic. So I would like to see you as a researcher, right? What did you find out about that so far?
Yes, and so your point about how much has changed over the past 10, 15 years. I mean, my last major research project before this was on the gendered inequity in the emerging influencer space. And so I found so many examples of influencers expected to do what I called aspirational labor, where, here, do this work and we'll give you free swag, or we'll post about you on our Instagram account, but no material rewards. And so again, fast forward a few years, and in some ways there's a lot more money to go around, but it's still incredibly lopsided. It is a winner take all economy where, we hear the accounts of the people making tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a post, and not about the so-called creator middle class where people are, kind of doing okay or in some ways scrambling a bit based on what's going on in the larger economy. Survey data suggests that, women and creators of color are facing structural inequities within these spaces where if you look at the payment systems, there is a staggering gap. And so I've still, even in this latest round of interviews, heard people that are like, yeah, brands will reach out to me, and when I send them my rate card, they're like, oh, we don't have a budget for that. And so, there's a lot of reasons. We can think about larger inequalities. We can think about the devalued status of labor. I mean, there's still this like generational hand ringing when someone says, "Oh, I want to be an influencer and creator," and people are like, "Oh, you just post all day." And it's like, no, it is incredibly labor intensive. And I mean, you know this very well how much time, energy, insight, and money goes into this space. But I think it's still not valued by brands or a lot of platform companies are courting high profile creators, but not necessarily the middle tier, despite how much attention they bring to the companies. And so, that goes back to this question of like, why does this still persist? Well, there's a lack of transparency. It is a sprawling industry where, it's not like we can trace the lineage into one particular company. There are so many players. It is so complicated to think about where, power and accountability lies. That said, I've been talking to influencers and creators during these interviews about, what they're doing within this space. And I think, the emergence of these pay transparency sites. I think you did a show recently about Fuck You Pay Me, the Clara for creators. I think it's, we're seeing these spaces where creators are coming together and kind of challenging this notion that it's incredibly individualistic by saying, look, there are forms of collective advocacy and support where we are trying to push back against the wider inequities. I've talked to a lot of creators who say, like, we share just with those in our network because otherwise you don't know. You have no idea how much the person next to you who on the surface has the same number of followers and is doing the same kind of work and creating the same kind of content. But, it's this race to the bottom in terms of payment. So I think there's important spaces that are emerging to kind of contest this. But yeah, absolutely, the inequities and the exploitation remain rife.
And again, I think also because it's 10 years ago was the Wild West. And to me, still it is sometimes because I just feel there is like a lot of confusion. There is sometimes, terminology is used in, different ways, miscommunication, misunderstandings, lost in translation many times, right? So I really do believe that we're going to need absolutely a better structure and hopefully, right, this type of problem is going to go away or at least, try to decrease the most possible in the next years. And just to, also know a bit more because, we discussed about what was before, right, and about the present. But I'm pretty sure also that when you talk with all these influencers and content creators, you might also have a sort of idea of what the future holds, maybe in terms of prediction of, okay, this is happening right now. But, creators would like to see these together, like, maybe in the relationship with their viewers, right? Or creators would like to see these happening. So I'm curious if during your conversation, again, in addition to what is happening now, have you also like had a grasp of, okay, creators, viewers, this is what they expect to happening maybe, I don't want to say in the next 5 years, because 5 years in the creator economy, it's crazy just to think about it. But let's say in the next 12 months, let's put it like that.
Okay, so that's more manageable. I have been struck by the ways that creators are speaking out against some of the less auspicious elements of this career. And so I hope we continue to see more of that. In terms of looking ahead, I do think the relationships between creators and fans is a really important space to pay attention to. And the emergence of fan communities who are really ready to rally on behalf of the creators and emulate some of the practices we would think of in the world of traditional media. I think given the precarity in the social media environment, we're going to continue to see more diffusion in terms of, more merch, more platforms, more educational offerings where creators push back against that all eggs in one basket culture, or embrace the all eggs in one basket culture. And which of course makes sense as a risk mitigation strategy, but that amounts to more work at the same time. But I think, overall, I having been studying this for so long, I'm cautiously more optimistic than I was when I started this research about, the potential for creators to wrest back some of the power and economics within this space.
Well, that is good, right? Because usually the more data that you have, many times, like, oh, damn, like, it's gonna go, it's not looking well, right? Okay, guy. But if you say, like, actually, I'm more optimistic, that is great, great to hear on that. And is there anything else that I didn't ask you today that you would like to share with us, either about something that you're studying these days, or anything else that excites you in the creator economy slash influencer slash even celebrities, or like on more traditional media?
The only thing I'll say, and I am, as anyone who's been working on a project for a few years, you can't wait to start the next big thing because I'm like, I just need to get this book out and move on. And so I've been thinking a lot about kind of going back and thinking about the role that celebrity paparazzi played in perhaps being a precursor to creators' representational practices. And that's kind of as far as I've thought about it. But there's a lot of attention to what happens when a career is usurped by the newest thing. And we think about journalism being killed and magazines being killed, but thinking about what happened to the celebrity paparazzi industry and how that might help us make sense of social media. And of course, like anyone else, I'm trying to make sense of how Gen AI is reshaping this space, but also if it is reshaping the space, because there's a hype machine there. And so how do we cut through and think about both the promises but also the perils for creators?
Absolutely. And it's one of the questions that we asked last year, and we ask again now for our new report about, actually, it's not a report, it's a guide for creators that, has a lot of different sections inside. And, it's curious to see, but to be honest, I see that is, as of now, it's been a big helper more than, a substitution or a replacement. So, but I want to see again, in the next year. And there are so many new AI tools every single day. It's a bit difficult to say. In the loop of data trends, every day I open the news, there is like 1,000 new things, and I'm like, sometimes you're a bit tired to learning new tricks all the time, right? So yeah, I'm also very curious about the future of that. But Brooke, thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing all your knowledge, and yeah, I'm very look forward to reading your book as soon as it's live and out.
Thank you so much. It was great to chat.
Absolutely. This was the Influence Factor by the Influencer Marketing Factory, and I'll see you next week.